This right here is me hitting the final boss of the Elden Ring DLC at the same time that he attacks me. Crazy, I know, but let me explain. Shadow of the Earth Tree gave us almost 100 new weapons, some of them following into one of the new 8 categories. So, after finishing my first playthrough, I thought it would be a good idea to try out one of these new ones, the Thrusting Shields category. The cool thing about these new shields is that they allow you to defend and attack at the very same time, giving you wireframes while you do so. This mechanic, allied to the new deflecting hard tier and the power of guard counters, made this one of the most fun playthroughs I've done in this game. There are only 2 weapons in this new category and both can be found in Shadowkeep, so we could either start with a prepped character for the DLC, or we could start from the very beginning and try to kill all the 26 major bosses found throughout the base game and Shadow of the Earth Tree, which is what we actually ended up doing. Before we continue, I will let you know that Miyazaki-san himself thinks you should totally subscribe to this channel if you end up liking the content. Okay, fair, that wasn't exactly Miyazaki, but come on, look at this graph. I'm counting on you to fix it. We started by creating a totally normal character and initiating our journey knowing that we would have to resort to a greater will to get our weapon earlier. And it's with that in mind that we start graciously praying to Miyazaki that answers our call and grants our first weapon, the Carrion Thrusting Shield. Ooh, Miyazaki! Give us the Carrion Shield, Miyazaki! There it is! This is the strongest one of the 2 and also most definitely the coolest, but more importantly, it has split scaling with both physical and magic damage, and so our plan was to give it the magic affinity and pump our int as much as we could. With the shield in hands, we run bravely towards our first boss fight. The Grafted Sign, how it's done. Well, it turns out that it is a good idea to have the stats to use our weapons properly, but hey, we can always fight the sign later if we want to, right? To make our thrusting shield build work properly, we would need to collect a few things in order to optimize our damage and actually make this run viable. We started by getting the minimum required stats to use the shield properly, picked up a couple of golden pickled fowl food, the charged attack tier and charged attack talisman for the beginning of our run, and actually got to fight the first proper boss of this run, the Pumpkinhead. That's great. That's messed up. Smashing this boss allows you to buy the Scholar's Shield sorcery from Selen that enhances damage negation for shields and could be useful later on. After this, we bravely venture into Murkwater Cave to have a business meeting with the always trustworthy Patches that ended up exposing one of our build's problems: kicks. That's right! 3 business meetings later, and we finally managed to get to a decent negotiation that rewards us with 3 more golden fowl food, as well as Margit's Shackle that is mostly used to reveal secret walls and unlock spirit springs in the DLC. Moving on, we collected the usual buffs that you have seen a bazillion times, like Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Howl of Shabribi, and got to one of the MVPs of this run, Crackblade. One of the unique things about the new thrusting shields is that they can receive a lot of Ashes of War that the normal ones can't, which makes up for a pretty powerful build. Crackblade increases your damage by 15% and your stance damage by 10% for 60 seconds. And as you can imagine, pairing this with the vicious defense and attack combo or the fully juiced guard counters was a recipe for success. From Liurnia we got the Winged Sword Insignia, the Blood Flame Blade Incantation, the Academy Key, and progressed Ria's quest to visit the crazy cannibal waifu and her pet snake in Volcano Manor later on.
Nice.
Speaking of food made me kind of hungry, so we decided it was time to drench ourselves with some tasty cheese by beating Grail, the Resident Knights Cavalry, and the always tough White Dragon in Kalith for a total of 220k cheesy bites. After investing in our first levels, we made a small trip back to the Putrid Avatar for the Stone Barbed Crack tier and its juicy 30% extra stance damage, and finally made it to the Altus Plateau where we would find the first actual proper talisman for this run. The Great Shield Talisman is found in a carriage east of the Earth Tree Gazing Hill Grace and will reduce stamina damage taken while blocking by 20%. Neat. After getting the Smithing Stone Bell Bearing 2 from the Sealed Tunnel, collecting every Golden Seed and Sacred Tier, upgrading our shield to +12, and leveling our character, we were finally ready to face the formidable Margit. With Golden Vow and Crackblade applied, we go in and pretty much extinguish his flame, abusing guard counters and stance damage. That's pretty cool.
Warrior blood must truly run in thy veins. Tarnished.
It's okay. The R1s are really cool too, because you can attack with R1s as you defend. With our second talisman pouch unlocked, it was time to make a small detour to the Academy of Spamming Lucaria to be able to change the affinity of our thrusting shield to magic. We get past a bunch of angry sorcerers and face off against the Red Wolf, who also barely stands a chance against our carrying Giga Chads. Mwah. Magic carrying thrusting shield in hand, we proceed to collect the second proper talisman for our build from the room with the banished knight in Stormville Castle. The curved sword talisman increases your guard counter damage by 20%, which is huge, and would have been a good help to beat Godric if I didn't forget to equip it for the fight. Nonetheless, Godric's efforts to break our guard proved to be insufficient, and we end up breaking his face instead. Great rune acquired and 1 remembrance down. Well, actually 2, as Rellana and the Renalinas also don't offer too much resistance. We get to the Radahn festival just as it is getting started, and with an extra pouch that we fill with the winged sword insignia. Radahn was a weird fight as I was trying to get a few more guard counters off, but interestingly enough, the more I tried to get hit, the more he would miss me. We end up getting a stagger and beating him mostly based on our damage. I guess that works out. Level 65 with 37 intelligence and a dream, it was now time to get past Morgoth in order to upgrade our shield to plus 18 and finally get the remaining piece of our Shadow Realm puzzle guarded by Mohg, the Hot Sauce Master.
Organic ketchup.
Defeating Morgoth gives you access to the mountaintops of the Giants, where you can find the Smithing Stone Bell-bearing tree in the Zamor ruins, granting us a solid weapon to fight Mohg. To achieve this, we make our way back to the Altus Plateau and face off against the Draconic Tree Sentinel, which for the first time in ages, we actually don't cheese off the cliff. This is actually a fun fight with the guard counters mechanic, as it works with most of his attacks, including the lightning and his own shield bashes. That is so good, man. GG's, I guess. Up the peaceful Lindale tree roots, we find the urinated Godfrey spirit.
You can't piss there!
That, much like the previous fight, is also very rewarding for this style of play, giving you the ability to counter back a lot of times. That's so good, man. This poor guy, man. With these two down, it was time for chat's favorite boss. For reasons unknown, of course. Morgoth wasn't as rewarding as the previous two bosses, as he seems to jump back when you hit the first part of the guard counter.
Thy part in this shall not be forgiven.
So, like, because he hits and runs away. And now it was finally time to get to
Mohg.
The easiest way to access this area is by doing various quests, which you can start by talking to him in Rose Church in Liurnia, doing his questline by invading Magnus, and then soaking the Lord of Blood's favor in the Church of Inhibition or Anticipation, for example. Using the Pure Blood Knight's medal that you get as a reward will teleport you directly to the Sauce Master's domain. With a plus 18 thrusting shield and the Purifying Crystal tier and a few more levels in intelligence, we were finally ready for Mohg. We were not. It turns out that we were not doing as much damage as expected, and because of that, we ended up experimenting with both Crackblade and Bloodflame Blade, but both required us to focus as our HP bar was still pretty underwhelming. After an hour of cursing Mohg, we were finally able to beat him, getting access to our 5th Remembrance, as well as access to the Shadow Realm and a juicy batch of 540k runes that we invested in HP. Time to visit the Lands of Shadow for the first time and essentially collect the last pieces of our build. In the distance, we find our first and probably most interesting target, the Hot Soup Golem. This tanky fella drops the new Deflecting Heart tier, which essentially brings Sekiro into Elden Ring, allowing you to benefit from perfect blocks and enhanced guard counter damage for an astonishing 5 minutes. That's pretty much every boss fight. This is an extraordinary tier, but wait until you see the one we cooked for the last boss. Our first shield was still at plus 18, so it was time to get the remaining upgrades, which are actually pretty easy to get in the Lands of Shadow. We borrowed some 7s from our good friend Gaius, a bunch of 8s from the Spirit of Balls, and raided the Ruined Forged Lava intake to get our final material to get a beautiful plus 25 thrusting shield. Perfect. Armed and dangerous, we make our way to Templetown Ruins to pick up the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, a brand new addition to the collection that will improve attacks with two-handed weapons by 15%, and since that's how we use the shield all the time, it was a no-brainer. As we move on to Shadowkeep to get our second shield, we make sure to pick up every Scooby-Doo fragment hitting Blessing level 9, just as we get ready to fight the Golden Hippopantanus. Deflections and guard counters work very well here, but my lack of experience with this wild specimen is what makes it a bit hard. Doing the normal motion, like it just runs towards you and it happens, like... No, what a mess. Nonetheless, and after a few tries, we managed to survive his carnivorous appetite, getting 2 more crucial scuba dives, and finally picking up our second weapon of the run, the dueling shield. Dual wielding these babies is lit. It sucks that you can't power stance them though. After scavenging the Realm of Shadow to complete our build, it was time to return to the main game and beat the remaining remembrances, and what better way to start than an exciting run to the mountaintops of the giants. Our objective is to finish the any percentage in the first place, and our next hurdle lies just before the biggest soup cauldron in the world, the Fire Giant, our good old friend. Ah, that's so unfortunate! This fight was mostly about being aggressive, as my attempts to guard counter on phase 2 ended up with me being sent back with no chance to attack back. In Fire Missoula, both bosses were interesting to fight, but like in many other occasions so far, the guard counter approach would either result in me not even getting hit at all, or sometimes not having the range to deal any damage, as both the Godskin duo, but especially Malekith, would move too fast for our shields. We had a pretty strong build at this point, so none of the main game bosses should be too much of a problem.
I knew you'd come.
Well, we don't talk about this guy. The race to the Elden Throne was heating up, and it was time to take on Horelu, the first Giga Chad. This is actually my favorite boss of the entire game, and fighting him with my newly found guard counter passion was pretty fun, and we ended up beating him with a mixture of quick attacks and deflects.
Tarnished.
On the final fight, Radagon was pretty accessible with plenty of deflecting opportunities and didn't give us much trouble. Now, this was my first time fighting the Elden Beast with the new Torrent update, and I gotta say that although I wasn't sure how I would feel, I think it is actually pretty good. In the fight itself, you can guard counter a few attacks and turn them into damage successfully, making this the perfect grilled fish for a hot summer night. Get out of here, Elden Beasts! With the any percentage completed and before heading back into the DLC, we embarked on a journey to beat the remaining main game remembrances with our eyes set specifically on a certain lady. You may know her as
Malenia, Blade of Mikola.
On our way to the Halic Tree, we proceeded to slow cook the Regal Spirit, to hammer Fia's Sims, Fortisax, Astel, Placidusax, Rykert, and Commander O'Grills. Okay, we got him. The Greeds. Oh, the Alley Tree, a place where all your dreams will come crashing down because of these goddamn ants. I apologize, but these hard-working fellas have given me 3 TSD
You serious?
over the course of the last few years. Loretta is our last obstacle before the Rot Goddess, and I have to say, this was a pretty cool fight with plenty of opportunities to showcase our strengths. That is awesome! Before descending to the roots of hell, we make sure to pick up the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman that graces us with 20% extra physical damage negation, a very generous boost in defense for the harder fights we would have ahead. This was the moment we were waiting for in the main game, the chance to fight the mighty Malenia. Could we fully deflect and guard counter her? Yes. Well, not before a tactical death first, of course. This was one of my favorite fights with the thrusting shield, and this partially helps explain why. That's so cool, man! That's right, with the new deflecting heart here, you can pretty much nullify Waterfall Dance by perfect blocking every bit of attack she dishes at you. 15 remembrances down and all of the base game completed, we touch the Wither Arm for a second time and make our way through Bellerod Settlement, a lovely place where you can enjoy Scorpion ASMR sessions, a crystalline lake, and most importantly, the Dancing Lion. This is not my favorite type of boss, but visually it can certainly pack a roar, with all of its 3 phases adding to the variety of moves across the fight. I struggled mostly with the Ice and Lightning phases as you get very few punishing options, but overall it didn't take us a lot of time. Okay. With our very first DLC Remembrance in hand, it was time to make it back to Shadowkeep, except this time we would use the side entrance. Coming in from the Church District side allows you to access a different part of this big side dungeon, and since we have to kill at least 3 more bosses here, this is just perfect. We parkour across some old rooftops and successfully make it to a big lever that empties the water from this place and allows us to finally open this big door where you can fight and capture Sunflora, the Scooby-Doo avatar. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a big fan of this fight, mostly because of the Thorns attack, but I'll admit it, this is mostly me not being familiar with the moveset just yet. Eventually, we make the smart decision of listening to chat and change the affinity on our shield to fire, which helped us beat it right away. Die, you stupid flower! Back to the Church District entrance, we take the elevator up this time and make it to the Specimen Storehouse. We're looking for Commander Gaius, as reports say that he's hogging 5 Scooby-Doo fragments.
Stop it. Get some help.
So beating him would give us quite a good boost in our blessing level. We take the ladder up and go through the hole on the wall to get to the loft area. From here, we take the elevator and do some dangerous parkour across the keep's rafters until we find our ride to the back gate grace. It was time to face against the almighty Gaius, and if you watched my first playthrough, you know how much I hated the charge attack from this boss. This time though, we had a trick up our sleeves as I was hoping to completely deflect it. Is Gyobu Masataka! Huh? What are you gonna do? Kill me, I guess. Okay, we had to worry about more than just the charge, but honestly, I really liked this boss minus that attack, so this was a very fun fight, and it actually didn't take us much time. Another remembrance down and 5 fragments richer, we are able to get to level 13, granting us a pretty solid boost for the rest of the DLC. From Shadowkeep's first grace, we make our way towards the outside area with the cursed boats this time, and take a sneaky ladder down that leads us to a secret painting and a classic wall where you can take a submarine to the other side of the world, or the map in this case. Following down the river from Unter Ruins, our next objective is to make it to the Darklight Catacombs that will give us access to the Bloodborne Remaster. But first, we make a small detour to take down 2 baby hippos for another 2 Scooby-Doos. The catacombs themselves have about 78 subterranean floors and a giant imp, but it's at the end that we find one of the most annoying bosses of the Shadow Realm, Yori, the Elden All-Knowing. You see, the problem with this boss is that it exists. Yori is a massive spammer, teleports away from you constantly, and best of all, spams minions to make this a very enjoyable fight. Okay guys, because we already knew about this bullshit, we buff ourselves and take a combination of guard counters, staggers, and riposts to get this boss out of the way. The next area will take us to one of my favorite bosses, and on the way we even get 2 new items that can boost our damage when madness occurs, and we're planning on taking advantage of that. The Madding Hand drops from, well, the Madding Hand, and the Aged One's Exaltation drops from one of these friendly fellas that need to be parried first to be damaged. Unfortunately for us, this Bloodborne remaster doesn't come with any guns, so we have to get close and personal to beat them. These 2 items combined will grant you a 27.5% damage boost for 30 seconds if Madness is procced. After a long and creepy walk, we arrive at Midra's House of Fun and clear the corridors of screaming enemies and venture into the hidden rooms to get to the owner of the place, Midra, the Lord of the Frenzied Flame. I love this boss, and even though madness could be a problem, the rest of the fight is very enjoyable, and the closer you stay to him, the easier it is to avoid the frenzy attacks most of the times. After a friendly hug, and dying a few times to the big AoE, where the flame comes crashing down on you, Midra perishes before our carrion shield. Okay, let's go. Let's go, the power of L1 and R1. This allows us to finally reach 60 intelligence, showing up to Castle Answers in pretty good shape, and maybe even a bit over-leveled when it comes to blessing level. The path to the main boss here is pretty linear, and besides the other Moon Brother and the annoying Pike enemies, we make it to the end without much trouble. On the other side of the fog gate, we find Rellana Twin Moon Knight. Except this time we have no annoying students to fight at the same time. This is probably one of the most fun fights if you plan on using the deflecting mechanic because of how aggressive she is. Despite still not knowing her moveset that well, we end up first trying this boss, becoming the last relevant Carrion Warrior alive. That's really cool. I love that. Nice and easy, actual first try. That is 5 remembrances in the bag, and the next one isn't too far away. Messmer is our next destination, and since we already have quite a bit of Shadowkeep unlocked, our path is quite clear. We pull the lever that rotates the mechanism in the room, crossing the beams to go outside of the castle and go past the breach to make it to his domain. Messmer the Impaler, the boss that we all dreamed of fighting before the DLC came out, and actually another one of my new favorite ones. Phase 1 is not a big problem, and we only really struggle with the grab attack and the bigger combo where I usually get hit by the flurry move. Phase 2 is a bit different. Mother! The snakes, man, the snakes. Phase 2 takes a while getting used to, but once you get the timing for the bite attacks, this fight becomes quite okay.
America.
After fighting knights, commanders, and impalers, it was time for the hiking of our lives as we aimed to reach the very top of the jagged peak, the domain of a mighty dragon that is nothing short of extraordinary. Bayle the Bread. This is probably one of From Software's most visually impressive fights, and the difficulty doesn't really fall behind. We had a pretty good Scooby-Doo level and knew a lot of his patterns, but unfortunately we didn't find many ways of successfully converting deflects into damage, as most of the times we would either get knocked back, cooked, or simply wouldn't have enough range. Phase 2 has a few attacks where I'm still pretty bad with the dodges. This double laser move, I'm bad at that. And this delayed ground explosion still get me almost every time, but with patience and hit by hit, Bayle falls down before our knees. We take it. After avenging Egon and making short work out of Saint Trina's weirdest wet dream. Get out of here. Easy, boss. We visit the closest cathedral and talk to the finger-licking weirdo that sends us on a quest to blow the 3 super sacred special bells of these lands.
Brother,
I know, questionable. Doing this grants you an audience with the Mother of Fingers, Meteor. A boss that embodies everything that I despise in this game. Fingers and attacks with a stupidly big range. Explosions aside, this fight is actually pretty accessible and we beat it with a mixture of guard counters and poise breaks. Somebody please help me! What the is happening? I have no idea how that thing works. And with the Mother of Fingers sent on a permanent leave, we would now venture into the ancient ruins of Raw, where we mostly run through the area, killing a baby hippo along the way for another Scooby-Doo fragment, and using our shackle to activate the nearby spirit spring to reach the last boss before a near limb. Romina the Taste Bud. Yeah, definitely Rotref. Jokes aside, I find this boss to be quite interesting, and if we exclude the butterfly attack or the beginning of her phase transition, I have no problems with it. Guard counters were hard to land sometimes as she moves quite fast and sometimes even drags you around the arena, but after a few attempts we extinguished the life of Quilag's long-lost sister. This meant that we had our paths almost cleared for the big finale, and before burning the tree we could advance some quests to make the NPC-friendly meeting ahead a little bit more empty, or to just not bother at all, and you know, obviously we did the smarter thing by just burning it right away. After a totally fair running section filled with bad weather and a lot of weird onion rings, we find Letta leading the friendly meeting. I'm going to be honest, we tried to beat these guys for about 90 minutes without summons, trying a lot of different approaches and even getting the spear talisman that we had missed previously and gives us an extra 15% damage when counterattacking, but getting stuck on a garbage boss just before the finale at 11 PM in the evening wasn't the plan, so we switched to plan B. We used the phone help and called up Nathan that gave us a precious help getting rid of this once before friendly meeting. It was time for the big final boss, and we had one more item to pick up. All the way down the Elak River, you find another hot soup golem that rewards you with the Viridian Tear, which eliminates all stamina consumption for 15 seconds. It may not sound like a lot, but this little burst of green tea is enough to get rid of Radahn's first phase by simply dunking under the shield and continuously pressing R1 for uninterrupted damage. With a very solid plan for phase 1, all we had left to do was to get used to the deflecting times and the fireworks on phase 2, and after about an hour or so, Radahn finally perishes, granting this Carian Knight the throne of the Realm of Shadow.